Welcome back to Become a Calm Mama. I'm your host. I'm Darlene Childress. I'm a life and parenting coach. And on today's episode, I'm going to introduce you to a concept called the drama triangle, which is obviously something you don't want to be in, and introduce you to how to get out of the drama triangle using an empowerment dynamic. So I'm going to describe what the drama triangle is, and then kind of how that works in parenting, how that works within ourselves, and then give you some real great strategies of how to get you and your family and the dynamics in your home out of this drama triangle and into a place where everyone is empowered and resilient. So let's hop in. So the drama triangle, it was named originally the Karpman Drama Triangle after a psychologist named Stephen Karpman, who described it in 1968. So what the Karpman Drama Triangle is really, I want you to picture a triangle. And in one corner of the triangle, we have the victim. You can think of that as like the bottom of the triangle, the victim. And then on each of the corners, you have the persecutor, and then you have the rescuer. So just think about it, even before I go into the descriptions of each of these. You have somebody who feels like the persecutor is hurting them and they are the victim. And then you have someone else who comes in and rescues that victim from the persecutor. So you kind of have a villain and you have a person who is being hurt by that villain. And then you have the person who's rescued by the villain. So think about it just in terms of like a family dynamic. I'm going to give you a bunch of family dynamics, but think about how sometimes you have a little kid and maybe they feel like mommy or daddy is being really mean to them or really strict or something like that. So imagine you have a 5-year-old and you're in a heterosexual relationship, right, with a dad. And the dad says to the kid, "That's enough. Go to bed. Don't talk. Don't jump out of bed anymore." Something like that. And then the little kid starts crying and says, "Oh, daddy's being so mean to me," and goes to you, the mom, and asks you basically like, "Help me, daddy's so mean." And then you go to your husband or your partner and you say, "Hey, that's not polite. Don't talk to him like that. Don't do that." And you are rescuing your child from your husband's behavior. Now, on some level, that feels like kind of good, right? You should do that because you don't want your partner to hurt your child, and you want to teach your partner how to, relate to your kid in a way that's not aggressive, especially if you're like committed to this podcast and you're a calm mama and you're listening to this a lot. And then you see your partner maybe not doing the same strategies that you've been practicing, trying to stay calm, trying to stay connected, trying to set limits without using fear, trying to follow through without using shame. So you're really working hard, and then you see your partner just kind of impulsive, reactive, threatening, maybe being physical, and you see your kid crying and sobbing and things like that. And you might feel like, "Oh my God, I've got to rescue my son or my daughter from their parent." Now, if that's the case, you have found yourself in a drama triangle because you have triangulated your relationship and taken away your child's, ability to communicate with their own parent and for them to problem solve together. You have created a codependent dynamic where everybody's turning to you, and now you're the rescuer of everybody, and you have to solve all the problems and fix everybody's issues. This happens a lot to women. We end up as the in-between, the go-between, the person who solves all the problems. And we do this because we often take on this rescuer role. So thinking about yourself and how that might play out, it could also play out with siblings, right? Where you have maybe the older sibling or the more aggressive sibling or the one who's easily dysregulated or has impulse control issues. Maybe one of your kids has ADHD. You might pigeonhole that child as the persecutor, the bad kid, the problem maker, the troublemaker. And that is then a role you've put them in. And then the other sibling, quote unquote, the good one, they become, in your mind, the victim of this big bad wolf, this other child of yours. And then you're the rescuer and you're intervening and trying to solve all these problems and get, the kid who's getting hurt, get them safe. Now, of course, as a parent, it is your responsibility to make sure everybody's safe. But what I want you to start thinking about is that if you start thinking that one kid is the persecutor and one kid is the victim, you are going to be looking at this from a drama triangle perspective. Now, why are these roles maladaptive? Why are these unhealthy? Really, because the victim, if we keep putting someone in a position of being victimized, what we have done is we have taken away their belief that they can solve their problems. We let them think that they are helpless and that they are trapped and that they cannot do for themselves. They can't advocate for themselves. They look to their rescuer to solve their problems for them. And that is a really disempowering place to be for the quote unquote victim. And that isn't what we want for our kids. We want our kids to recognize a problem, see something happening in their life, and then you coach them and you help them see how they can take responsibility, what they can do to change, how they can have conversations. When we rescue, we go in and we do that dirty work for them. And it really denies our kids the opportunity to learn how to advocate for themselves. What happens also to the rescuer, right, is that we then have a perspective of that victim that they cannot solve their own problems, that they need us. And for a lot of us moms, we actually want to be needed. We kind of like having our kids need us and being there for them. And when we switch from the drama triangle to the empowerment dynamic, you don't actually lose your role. In the empowerment dynamic, the rescuer becomes the coach. So instead of solving the problems for the person that you see as being victimized, most likely your child, instead of solving the problems, you coach and ask good questions and give ideas for that little kid to solve their problems on their own. And if they come up with obstacles, you kind of help them, build up belief in themselves that they can handle it. That's what a coach does. When you work with me, I don't go to your house and fix your problems. I'm not a rescuer for you. I can't possibly do that. And I don't want you to rely on me for my thoughts and feelings about your life. I want you to feel empowered. So as your coach, I look at you and I do not think of you as a victim of circumstance or children or whatever it is. I don't think you're the persecutor either. I don't think that way at all. I think, okay, this is a problem and this is a person who has infinite wisdom and has an intuition and has a lot of skills and they can solve their problem. Let me help them see that. Let me give them some ideas. The bummer about the rescuer role, not only does it change the way you view your children or whoever you're looking at as the victim, it limits the victim, it also limits you, because then you are not necessarily meeting your own needs. A lot of times when we rescue, we feel resentful and we get into that rescue resentment cycle. And you can look at your kid and be like, why am I still talking about this with you? And it's really because you haven't given your children an empowerment, the empowerment to influence how they think and feel and act. So rescuers, they often feel compelled to help the victim, and then they end up sacrificing their own time, their own energy, and their own needs in the process. And that is really just hard, right? We already, as moms, do sacrifice so much of our time and energy and needs. But we want to be doing it in a way that builds a ladder for our children so that they can eventually take care of themselves and problem solve for themselves. So we want to try to rescue as little as possible. So what are some attributes of a persecutor? Okay, a persecutor is often blaming others and holding other people responsible for their actions. They can be very, very critical. They, instead of responding with helpful behavior, they respond with judgment and criticism. And the persecutor is often misunderstood because feelings drive behavior, and the person who's acting critical and judgmental and demanding and spiteful and scornful is a person who is in pain, is a person who needs support. But we often we go to the victim and we don't go to the persecutor, and the persecutor stays stuck in that role of being the bad guy in the dynamic between the three. And that happens to older siblings. It happens to aggressive kids with ADHD, kids with neurodivergence, parents who aren't emotionally regulated. And that can make the persecutor, who is treated like a persecutor, feel very isolated and disconnected from the community. They don't get the coaching. They don't get the support they need. So they don't learn the skills of how to communicate their thoughts and feelings and needs in a way that is actually helpful. And they continue to get stuck in this role and in this mode of blaming others, being critical of others. And deep down, that person is feeling a ton of pain. They're feeling isolated. They're feeling disconnected. They're feeling out of bounds, out of control. And they're trying to get control back. In many ways, both the rescuer and the persecutor are trying to get control over the situation. The rescuer is getting control by, changing how the victim feels, and the persecutor is getting controlled by, putting down somebody else, and then they feel empowered. But it's not a real empowerment. Right? Bullying doesn't actually make us feel good. Hurting others doesn't make us feel good. It might be a release of some tension in our body and some negative thoughts, and maybe a way to deal with our poor self-esteem, but it's not a long-term solution. It doesn't heal anything. So instead of having our kids in this drama triangle, particularly either with an aggressive child or with an aggressive partner. And I don't mean aggressive like always being physical, just that person who kind of nitpicks and is harsh and complains a lot and is negative and, judgmental and that kind of energy. It can feel like we are all victims of that person's emotions. And that's not a great place to be as a person, right? It's very disempowering to feel like I am a victim and or a rescue. I have to rescue this family from this other big bad wolf, right? So in the shift from the drama triangle to the empowerment dynamic, what I want you to be thinking of depersonalizing the persecutor and thinking of it as a challenge in your life. So instead of being like, that person is hurting me, being like, I am hurt. Now what do I do about that? So kind of depersonalizing it as much as possible. So I've given a lot of examples about how you are the rescuer and your kid is usually the victim of either another kid or another parent. But I want you to think about another dynamic that could be at play in your family where you feel that you are the victim and that your child is the persecutor of you, and you want your co-parent to rescue you, or another sibling, one of your other children, to rescue you. And this is a very dangerous situation, right? So if you see yourself as the victim of your child's behavior and you want to be rescued, you're going to go look to your partner to save you, or your teacher to tell you what to do, or their other sibling. Now, if you have another sibling who is the rescuer in your family and rescues you from your feelings about your other child's behavior, that is setting up your kids in a way where they aren't going to learn how to take care of their own needs because they're going to be focused on your needs. And we don't want to raise kids who are parentified in childhood. We want to raise kids who get to be the child and we are the parent. So just catch yourself if you're feeling like, and I felt this way. I literally felt like Lincoln was abusing me. I used that language when he was 4 years old. I was so disempowered by his behavior and I felt so victimized. And then I would turn on him and become a persecutor to protect myself. And I would put him into a victim position so I could get my power back. That was a very unhealthy dynamic, obviously. It's why I do the work I do now, because I didn't want to victimize my child. I didn't want to persecute him, nor did I want to think of him as hurting me. I was so enmeshed in how his behavior affected me that I was not able to coach him through his behavior and what it meant to him and his feelings and how he was communicating the feelings, because I was stuck in a victim mode and then immediately switched to persecutor mode. So I kept my son and I in this drama triangle for quite some time until I got some help and realized that I needed to heal myself so that I didn't have to think of myself as a victim anymore and free myself from that mentality where my old wounds are like, there is a persecutor. I'm always in danger. Someone's always out to get me. And I've got to be on guard. I got to protect myself. I've got to be vigilant. I've got to be paying attention at all times. So I was like a victim, really always ready for a persecutor. And through the hierarchy of healing, through internal family systems, like all of these different things I've talked about this year on the podcast about internal healing, I have learned that I don't have to view the world as persecuting me, that I don't have to view myself as in danger, that I don't have to view myself as disempowered, that I can actually see myself as the creator of my own reality and have trust that when challenges come up, instead of feeling persecuted, I can look at them from a neutral perspective and say, that's a challenge in my life. I'm not a victim of this circumstance. I'm a person experiencing this circumstance, and I have agency, I have creativity, I have empowerment of how I respond to that challenge. I don't need rescuing. I don't need to be triangulated. I have it within me to deal with the challenges in my life. Now, sometimes those challenges are my kids' behavior. Sometimes those challenges are my husband's behavior. Sometimes those challenges are how the world is working right now. And if I feel scared, that means that I'm in a victimized space. That means I feel like I don't have agency. For me, when I feel like I don't have power, I overpower. Instead of going within and equipping myself inside with my own sense of self and trust and wisdom, if I go out in the world and I start to attack back, then that means that I probably felt victimized. So I'm sharing all this because sometimes the inner drama triangle works like this, where you might be thinking that the world is unsafe, or that your kid's behavior is unsafe, or that you're being judged all the time, and you might be feeling persecuted by your life. I don't ever have enough money. I don't ever have enough friends. I never look good. My kids are so poorly behaved. I can't keep my house looking organized and neat and tidy. Whatever it is, sometimes you persecute yourself with all of this negativity and you put yourself in a victim position, and then you might rescue yourself with binging television shows, or excessive screen use, or buying a lot of clothing, or dieting and restrictive dieting. Or maybe you comfort yourself with a lot of extra food, or you comfort yourself by, I comfort myself by watching television a lot. Instead of really taking excellent care of myself, sometimes when I'm in that victim mode, I want to be rescued and I end up kind of hurting myself further. A little bit of rescue is fine. Rescue your kids a little bit, intervening a little bit, rescuing yourself. I don't want you to get too caught up in that you shouldn't do those things, but I do want you to be aware, are you doing them from a perspective of I am a victim, I have no agency and power, I might as well give up. It goes back to fix it and fuck it. That episode I did about when I feel super powerless, then I'm like, fuck it. And I just give in. And I'm in a very strong victim space. But if I feel like sometimes my fix it energy is very persecutor energy. It's very big. It's very dominant. It's very much about getting power back. And sometimes that looks like rescuing the whole family from what I think of as like we're being persecuted by, I don't know, like messiness or whatever it is. So, or the school system or something like that, or the teachers or the soccer coach or whatever. If I, for some reason, decide that my family is in danger, I can go fix it, fuck it really easily. But what I'm offering to you and for your kids is a perspective shift that you don't have to think of things that are persecuting you. You don't have to look at your child's behavior as like that you're victim of your child's behavior, that you have no control over it, that you have no agency, like whatever, I don't know what to do. It's like you don't have to feel that disempowered. You can get some perspective and some equipping within yourself and say, okay, this is currently happening. And I know I've solved many problems in the past. So let me figure out how to solve this one. That is where the victim becomes the creator. So in the empowerment dynamic, I know I'm talking really fast, so you might have to re-listen to this episode. But in the empowerment dynamic, you have the persecutor becomes the challenge. The rescuer becomes the coach. And the victim becomes the creator. It's the person who can create a new reality. And I want to make sure I give credit to David Emerald, who wrote a book called The Power of TED, and TED stands for the Empowerment Dynamic. And what this author did is that he took the drama triangle and he switched it up and created this empowerment dynamic. So gave those labels from persecutor to challenger or challenge, from rescuer to coach, and then victim to creator. And he has this short little book called The Power of TED that you can get on Amazon or whatever. So anyway, the empowerment dynamic is really cool because you can get yourself out of the triangle. Now, I want to give you some tips of how to do that, right? The first thing that is always required whenever you go to change a behavior or a pattern in your life or any sort of dynamic that you have is always going to be awareness. So I think that the pause break, which is one of the primary tools I teach, I've taught it on the podcast many times, especially early on in episodes like 8, 9, and 10, something like that. We'll link those in the show notes. The pause break is really whenever you realize that you are in a maladaptive strategy, when you are yelling at your kids, when you are rescuing your kids, when you are being permissive, when you are being overly harsh, when you are monologuing or lecturing, when you are grunting and groaning and complaining, whatever that behavior looks like, when you catch yourself, that's when you pause and you take that pause break. So awareness is really the key to changing any behavior. So looking at the drama triangle, if you see yourself as a persecutor, like you're hurting your kids, you might end up all of a sudden persecuting yourself. And now you're a victim of your own negative thoughts, right? So I want you to think about that triangle and move to the center of the triangle. Take yourself out of the scenario and become an observer. observing yourself, observing your kids, becoming aware of the dynamic that's happening. You can also build more awareness through the act of meditation, mindfulness, journaling, stretching, yoga, walking without listening to a podcast or audiobook or music, being in your own thoughts. Anytime that you are able to take a break from your life and do some reflection and think about your thinking, think about your patterns, think about the feelings you have, that is going to be really, really helpful. So your work really is all about getting in touch with yourself and becoming a compassionate witness of your own behavior. You cannot change your drama triangle until you recognize which role you're playing. And you can't recognize that role if you're not looking to figure out what it is. I noticed that I was rescuing my younger son from my husband for years. I did not want my husband to say things about my son to him. I didn't want him to correct him because I felt that my husband was too harsh. He had negative thoughts about my son or our son, and that I was afraid. And I realized that I was triangulating myself. And in that process, I denied my husband and son the ability to build their relationship. And I have a lot of regrets about that. I've talked about it on the podcast. But when I use this language of the drama triangle, I see that I saw my son as a victim and my husband as a persecutor and me as the rescuer. So I was constantly intervening, stepping in, and solving the problems, either talking to my husband or talking to my son. And I just kept being like a busybody, like a middleman, meddler, trying to make sure that my son didn't get hurt. But in that process of thinking of my son as a victim, I actually, again, denied him of his opportunity to be in a relationship with his dad. And I also denied my husband the opportunity to grow as a parent. So every time I was triangulating, I was actually pulling my kid and my husband apart. What I thought was protection was actually drama. What I thought of as being good was actually hurtful. And when I understood the empowerment dynamic and could see that for both of my husband and my son, that they each had to figure out how to be in a relationship with each other, and that my role was to be a neutral observer and to coach when necessary, or just be a witness of it. You don't always have to have a triangle. It can just be that person and that person have a relationship, and it's going to look like what it looks like, and they have to be figuring it out. Now, I want to be really clear. My husband was never trying to hurt my son physically, emotionally. He was never rude, mean, like really anything. I just felt so scared that my son would get, like, his self-esteem would be hurt by correction. I was too in my head about what was being said and like making it mean a bunch of stuff, when actually my husband was just correcting our son and saying, hey, cut that out, or don't do that, or that's not cool, whatever. He was always very, like, my husband is a cool cucumber. And so I don't know what made me think that he was like this big bad wolf. But again, I think it was my own trauma response to thinking, like, I didn't really understand how men were supposed to act, and like strong voices and all of that. Just got very nervous about it. And they're both they can, like I said, my husband is cool as a cucumber. He's very kind, and he's very cautious, and he's very careful with his words. And he can also be a bit of a hothead. And so can my younger son. So the two of them, they would get into it a little bit, and I would just get nervous, and I would like immediately shut it down. But really, now that I stopped doing that about 5 years ago, I've watched that the two of them know how to shut it down themselves. Like, I can trust them. I can trust that neither are a victim, neither are powerless, that they both want a good relationship with each other. They both care about each other, and they're working towards figuring out what their relationship is supposed to look like. That's obviously still a work in progress, but the minute I stepped out of that triangle, I noticed that their relationship started to become whatever it was supposed to be. So I say that all to just remind you that you cannot change a dynamic until you're aware of it. And I hope this episode is helping you kind of see where you are in the dynamic. Are you persecuting your kids because you feel victimized by their behavior or life or overwhelmed by circumstances? Are you rescuing? Are you feeling victimized? Just look around. You might see this triangle more and more as you kind of observe and look for it. And then when you catch yourself, just think, okay, the victim is not a victim. The victim is a creator of their own reality, and they get to decide how they respond. I don't need to rescue. I can coach. So the rescuer becomes the coach, the victim becomes the creator, and the persecutor becomes the challenge. As neutral as possible, just a circumstance in life. Okay, I hope this was helpful. I'm really interested. If you are curious about the drama triangle, send me an email. We can dialogue about it, or talk to me on Instagram or whatever. I'm just very interested in this. Where are you seeing it in your life, and what have you noticed, and how do you want to get out of it? And if you're in the Calm Mama Club and you're listening to this and you're like, I want to talk more about this, just bring it to a session and we can talk about it. And also, we're going to put up a couple of links for images of the different dynamics so that you can have a visual representation of what I've been talking about. All right, mamas, I hope you get out of the drama triangle this week and that you start to work towards the empowerment dynamic in your home and in your life and in yourself. And I will talk to you next time. Hey, mama, if you enjoyed this podcast episode, I want to encourage you to do two things. The first is go to my website, calmmamacoaching.com, and get a copy of the Stop Yelling cheat sheet. You'll get a step-by-step breakdown of the most important tool I teach, which is the pause break. And you'll also get 40 ideas to reset your body and balance your nervous system so you don't have to yell at your kids. You can get a copy of that, again, at my website, calmmamacoaching.com/stop yelling. The other thing I'd love for you to do is go to Apple Podcasts and rate and review this podcast so that other moms can discover empowering and helpful, practical parenting strategies, just like you did today. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. It means a lot to be in your ear every week and to support you on your parenting journey.